All right, I'll call this meeting of the Plan Commission to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Allred?
Here.
Mr. Fell?
Here.
Mr. Fitch?
Here.
Mr. Hopkins? Mr. Weiskopf?
Here.
Ms. Yu?
Here.
Mr. Ackerson? And Ms. Billman.
Great, we do have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are none.
Minutes. We have minutes from the October 10, 2019 Plan Commission. Any motions regarding the minutes? You were gone. Who? Anybody here? I'll make a motion. I move that the minutes be approved.
Second.
Second, Mr. Allred. Motion, Mr. Fitch. I do have two very small changes, I think. One is a typo, and the other I've got a question about. So at the page, it'd be nice if we'd numbered these. 1, 2, 3, 4. At the top of the fourth page, the second sentence referring to Mr. Anderson, I think he's not like a James Bond operative whose code name is H, right? He's
Correct.
so that should be he.
Yeah.
Right. The other thing is on the next page, fourth paragraph down, is that Lori's correct title?
Let's see. As of October 10th, yes. October 17th was
that when that
officially her
took
first.
effect?
Yes.
Okay, just checking.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I got. Any other points on the minutes? We'll do this by voice vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Those opposed? The minutes are approved. We've now got communications. We do have, I think I'll point your attention to this headed out by Mr. Ricci just before the meeting, and when he gives us his presentation tonight, it pertains to the plan case we're going to hear. It's a slight rewording of something that's in the staff memo. Continued public hearings. We have Plan Case 2359 T18, application by the zoning administrator to amend the zoning ordinance with changes to Article 2, Article 5, Article 6, and other relevant sections to facilitate solar energy installation. That case is going to be continued to the November 7th, 2019 meeting. Excuse me. Plan Case 2018 A03 and 2360 M18, proposed annexation agreement between the City of Urbana and Henry Merkello, including rezoning from County R5, a manufactured home park, to City R1, single-family residential, for a parcel located at 2218 East University Avenue. That case is continued to the December 5th, 2019 meeting. And now a case that we will consider tonight, Plan Case 2383 T19, an application by the zoning administrator to amend the subdivision and land development ordinance and create the manual of practice. Mr. Ricci.
Good evening. I think, speaking of continued cases, this is probably the longest continued project, maybe, that the city's been working on. It hasn't been a case that long, but it's a big project. So, tonight we will be starting off our discussion about the revision or actual redaction and replacement of the subdivision code. The zoning administrator will soon submit a request to Urbana City Council to replace the subdivision code with a new version. The subdivision code applies to all development, of which you have a definition provided with a new version within the city of Urbana and within its 1.5 mile extraterritorial jurisdiction. This is actually an amendment of City Code, Chapter 21, and not technically of the zoning ordinance. The update will simplify the subdivision and development process and continue to regulate the division of tracts of land within the city's limits and its ETJ. The code would continue to be administered by the Urbana City Council and the city's boards and commissions. The proposed subdivision code would establish a manual of practice that will contain the technical content that is currently found in the subdivision code. The manual will include technical standards for plat and design document preparation and the standards for public infrastructure construction. The manual itself would be administratively implemented and updated, and moving such technical content from the subdivision code to the manual of practice will allow for more streamlined updates as well as for quicker and more understandable implementation by the city's populace. Staff seek direction from the Plan Commission on the proposed language of the subdivision code and the associated manual. This staff report in tonight's meeting will cover subdivision code articles 1 and 2 and manual of practice chapters 1 through 5, which are the more planning oriented elements of each document. Later, staff report and the November 21st meeting will cover articles 3 through 5 and chapters 6 through 26, which focus on the more engineering-related elements, and we will hopefully have staff here from Public Works to help answer any more engineering-oriented questions. Comments provided tonight or before the next meeting will be reviewed and incorporated into a revised version of these two articles that will be brought back and presented to Plan Commission and presented at the following meeting. And so a little bit of history. The current subdivision code was adopted in 1988, which replaced an earlier version in a similar redaction and replacement fashion. Staff began actively revising the subdivision code in early 2009 after having done 6 or 7 different amendments to it and realizing that continuing to amend subdivision code was not the way to go. In collaboration with many other city departments and divisions, Public Works, Engineering, and Arbor divisions, Community Development Services, Planning and Economic Development and Building Safety divisions, and also the Legal division. Early discussions also included Finance, Fire, and Police departments. Staff elected to follow the same process that the City of Champaign employed when they updated their subdivision code, which was to revise the council-administered subdivision code and move technical standards into a staff-administered manual. Separating the code from the standards would streamline implementation by both city personnel and the private sector by breaking out the technical aspects and administrative tasks into a new manual, allowing these routine tasks and decisions to be handled by staff and reserving the more important policy decisions to City Council and Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals when necessary. After producing a working draft, which was reviewed by the city's legal division, planning staff convened a technical working group and a developer working group to provide external review and feedback. This resulted in the draft revision of the subdivision code and a draft of the first ever manual of practice. These revised drafts were then reviewed again by the city's legal division. Those comments were then addressed by planning and engineering staff, and a final draft is now ready for review by Plan Commission. The updated code has been modernized to match current best practices and has been made future-proof by moving technical standards into the manual, which now contains the most recent standards and technical details and will be easy to update when new technologies and standards arise. Definitions and references to state laws have also been updated in the revised subdivision code and added to the manual where necessary. Digital plan submissions will also simplify the review process both for applicants and for city staff. There have been several updates to the subdivision code that promote more sustainable types of development. Connectivity and conservation are key themes. The code encourages connectivity through shorter and narrower streets that serve all users. Bicycle lanes and paths are required. Low-impact development practices are encouraged to minimize the impact of new developments on water quality. LED street lighting will reduce energy consumption. New requirements for street trees will reduce carbon emissions and the urban heat island effect, and developers will be required to either install street trees in new developments or to pay the city to install them. Moving into the discussion, the revised subdivision code follows the same format of the current code, using 5 articles to cover the existing and new material. As I mentioned before, we will cover Articles 1 and 2. Significant changes are summarized in Exhibit B, as well as the handout that I gave you tonight, which focuses just on the changes we'll be looking at tonight, which are in Articles 1 and 2. In the legal black line comparison of Exhibit C, I believe, no, Exhibit D. Black font is checks that is the same from the old version. Blue underlined font is new added information. Red strike through text is text that's been deleted. And if there's text that has been struck out double and is in green, that means it was moved from one section to another. Due to the foibles of Microsoft products, sometimes moves are shown as a series of deletions and additions. So you will often see complete sections that say they're struck out, but then several paragraphs later you'll see that whole section added right back in again. So moving to the little handout that I gave you tonight, there were over 150 changes made to the subdivision code. There were probably 30 that were fairly significant. Some of them are, completely administrative, like changing the numbering from the Chapter 21 and then a 2-digit code to the standard 3-digit numeric code following the 21. That was recommended by our legal division. Moving into the significant changes handout, we did add 2 purposes to reflect the city's updated goals, to provide safest achievable access for all users while acknowledging the increasing vulnerability of pedestrians and cyclists. This was in response to comments from the Bicycle Pedestrian and Advisory Commission, who wanted to promote the use of complete streets methodology and thinking to at least consider all modes of transportation whenever transportation decisions were being made. New modes or all modes would not always be included, but at least they would be considered when adding in a new street or widening a street. Also, to conserve natural resources and long-term environmental sustainability of the community. This was recommended by city staff, including our sustainability staff. The city does have a climate action plan that is working hard to implement, and if there are ways to better manage stormwater or erosion, to reduce carbon emissions that we can implement through the subdivision code and how we develop land in the city, whether it's public or private land, then that puts us one step closer to fulfilling our climate goals. It references directly the manual of practice to dictate technical aspects of design. This section simply states that the manual shall control the technical aspects of design, material, and construction for improvements required by the subdivision code. So the subdivision code itself establishes the authority of the manual of practice to be that document that's going to say how wide the sidewalk should be, or whether the sidewalk should be on one side of the street or both sides of the street, how wide the street itself should be, cul-de-sacs, all those sorts of things, sanitary, storm sewer. Moving on to page number 4, it differentiates between waivers granted by the corporate authorities and those granted by the Administrative Review Committee. Other than requiring a traffic impact analysis, all waivers will still be controlled by the corporate authorities, which is City Council. It clarifies the minor development approval process. The main thing in here is often a developer will say, we know that you want us to put in sidewalks, but, we're 3/4 of a mile out from the nearest sidewalk, and nobody's going to be walking out here. Why should we put in sidewalks? The city regularly already defers the construction of those sidewalks. It isn't waiving them. It is simply saying, we're not going to make you put them in until sidewalks come out your way, unless there is some compelling reason to provide internal sidewalks that don't connect to anything. One thing that comes to mind might be a residential subdivision where the residents would want sidewalks to walk around, even if those sidewalks aren't connected to anything outside the development. Adds requirements in for additional reports from other relevant agencies. We already send out our minor and major development plats, as well as our certificates of exemption, to probably 20 different agencies for their review, whether it's the local drainage district or the school district or Ameren, Illinois. This adds in some additional agencies such as the Champaign County Soil and Water Conservation District, Illinois Department of Natural Resources, the Illinois Historic Preservation Office. Those currently aren't required in the subdivision code. We do those by practice now to provide for that review, but the code doesn't require it. We want those requirements to be in there so that we can find out if there is, say, an old cemetery in the area, or if there is a wetland or floodplain out there. Moving on, it increases the preliminary plat approval extensions to increments of up to 2 years. This is a little more convoluted. It does not require approval by corporate authorities for preliminary plats that request no waivers. So if a preliminary plat comes in and they are doing a by right development, it no longer needs to go to corporate authorities for preliminary approval. It will still go there for final approval if there are no waivers being requested. So if waivers are going to be requested in that preliminary plat, it would then go to City Council. It also, the Administrative Review Committee, which is made up of the city engineer, the Director of Community Development Services, and the Planning Manager, they may administratively extend the period for final approval of a preliminary plat in annual increments of up to 2 years if it meets 5 conditions. There isn't a limit on the number of times a preliminary plat can be extended, but they do it in increments of 2 years. Again, it's a preliminary plat approval. It's not final plat approval. It's simply allowing the developer the time that they may need to get that final plat turned in to be approved by City Council. And it shifts final plat approval extension, not approval, but approval extension, to the planning secretary, and this extension may be granted for up to 1 year, up to 2 times, for a total of 2 years of extension. And then the language is simply, the ARC may extend the period for final approval of a preliminary plat in annual increments of up to 2 years under 5 conditions that are laid out in the subdivision code. So those are the significant changes that are in Articles 1 and 2. Moving back over to the memo, everything in the Manual of Practice is technically new. Some of it was moved over from the subdivision code, and some of it was, new de novo. Significant items in the Manual of Practice that were new are as follows. It requires plans to be submitted in electronic format, either through an online portal or as a PDF, and it also reduces the number of paper plan sets that are required. It added low-impact development practices to the stormwater design section, and it added street tree requirements and a street tree fee for new developments. Items that it moved over from the subdivision code itself include the traffic impact analysis, threshold criteria, drafting requirements and supporting document requirements for preliminary plats. It brought all of the street design elements and development sketch plans, plats, general area plan, topographic surveys. It brought all of that from the subdivision code into the manual, so that if it turns out the city engineer thinks that they need an additional element added to a plat or a sewer plan that gets submitted, they don't have to go to city council to say, we want to know the inner and outer dimensions, diameters of a sewer project, not just the outer dimension. And it moves applications for engineer approval and developments and petitions for waiver over into the manual of practice. So that is the nuts and bolts of the staff report. The Plan Commission's review will give us that critical citizen planning perspective. We will review your comments and incorporate them into the draft documents, and then when we're all done reviewing at the Plan Commission level, we will present those revisions to City Council. And if revisions are significant, it might require review again by city staff and the legal division. And we will also consider comments from the commission and from the public while we are drafting the proposed city code text amendment. So if you would like, we can move into either the clean line version or the compare version, or if you want to say it's beautiful and we don't need to talk about it, I'm glad to take that opinion as well.
Well, Mr. Ricci, fabulous amount of work here. This is a very huge undertaking. So I have I'll throw it open for questions from anybody else. I've got some things I want to talk about, but anybody have any? Mr. Allred?
A few questions.
Sure.
So the Administrative Review Committee, the ARC, mentioned several times the membership includes, I think it's a secretary of the Plan Commission, but I couldn't tell who that is.
That is
That's Kevin, okay.
Kevin.
That's what
and
I
it's also-
assumed, but I
right.
didn't see that anywhere, so, okay.
Right.
One question down. In the purpose, I'm trying to remember.
Are you looking at
It's hard
the
to tell what, it's section,
markup?
section 21-110, purposes. So, one of the new ones that were added, I assume, was this. Give me a second here. The one that mentions lead.
Low impact development or
No, no, no.
lead?
Not purpose, policies, 21-105.
Okay.
Item F in there,
Yes.
that's talking about conservation and suggestion to use certain standards like lead. Was the inclusion of lead on purpose, or I'm just curious if it wouldn't be more appropriate to use lead ND, for example, for subdivision.
Lead
Type.
ND
The
would
standard.
make sense
Okay.
for a subdivision code.
Okay.
That makes sense. I think, and again, that suggestion was already in there when I came on staff. It's possible that lead ND might not have been a thing yet
Okay.
when this was started in 2009 or 2005.
Okay.
So duly noted, lead ND.
In the definitions,
Yes.
when it talks about the comprehensive plan, it says that it means the city's 2005 comprehensive plan. Again, maybe this is an artifact of the 2-year lag, but I know the city is about to undertake an update of that. Would it make more sense to just have that read something like, means the city's most recently adopted comprehensive plan, or something like that?
Well, it does mention any successive comprehensive plan.
Okay.
So we always like to start with whatever is in force at the time of the writing of the document, and then adding in either comma as amended or as revised, or in this case, or any other comprehensive, or any successive comprehensive plan.
Okay, sounds good. This, there was something in the phrasing of the definition of low-impact development. Never mind. I think that's fine after reading
Okay.
it again. I'm going to look for one other thing. You can jump in if you want. I'm trying to find the page that I
Yeah,
saw it on.
it's a hard document to navigate.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that brings me to a couple of observations. It is a huge amount of work, and so what I tried to do was go through Exhibit A, which purports to give the old location and a new location.
Yes,
The new locations are in the old numbering system.
yes,
So I had trouble navigating through that until I kind of figured it out. You know what I mean? And even still, that it's hard to follow both. It's hard to follow both, and I wanted to see where when things were moved is the hardest thing to find.
Right.
So maybe if we could have the new location actually with the 3-digit after the hyphen, I think that
Okay.
would be helpful to me. Having the original location is very useful as well, but having the new renumbered location for all these I think would be helpful.
I agree.
And having said that, in my attempt to understand what was going on with in the markup version, which is the version I prefer to use, but I think I couldn't find the old 21.9, 21.10, 21.11, and 21.17. I didn't get a chance to look at them and see what they did, but so it jumps from 21.8 to 21.13. All right, actually, so that means 21.12 is gone too.
So what I did bring with me tonight was the current version of the subdivision code.
Well, we don't necessarily
Okay.
have to answer it now. I just want to be able to put it all together at the end, that look with special attention to the substantive changes, of course.
Right.
So having said that, the other thing is I think some of your strike-throughs, and I'm sure you didn't do all this. Like you said, it's been going on for a long time.
Right.
But some of them, so if you go back to the first page of the markup, I'm not sure, some of the language is not there. So if you look at the first blue, the last blue before number A of 21.105, of the city and its extraterritorial jurisdiction, the subdivision of land and its subsequent, and then it goes right into number A.
That is because the next word is development.
Right. It just, the A threw me.
Yes,
So, and the rest of them seem like bulleted points, whereas that's a continuation of the previous clause, right?
yes,
I don't know if you want to renumber that or not, but so there's places like that where I had trouble following it because of the nature of the markup. There's on page 4 of it, for example, there's an N. There's a letter N that there isn't anything there. And so on and so forth. I mean, I think what I could say about that is, as you go forward, just have somebody else put their eyes on it and scour it
Well, it's,
You know what I mean?
Yes,
They're
I do. I
just
do.
little, it's such a big document with so many changes going on that little
Right.
things
So
like that happen.
manually proof it rather than.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing. And then on a substantive note, in regard to the significant changes in, let's see, it's actually in the memo on page 4. They're listed out. And the ones that I'm going to talk about are the last two, which would be the one in section 21-225 and 21-230 concerning extensions. And so I looked at these, and I'm not sure that the language says what the memo says. So if you look at the first one, increase preliminary plat extensions to increments of up to 2 years. And that is on page 47 of the markup. Yeah, I know. I had cross eyes by the time I was done. So it's number 2. And I got thrown there by the word annual. So this says approval extensions to increments of up to 2 years. And then the actual insert says in annual increments of up to 2 years. Which is what? Biannual, right?
So are you thinking that it is allowing 1-year extensions?
Twice? Is it allowing 1-year extensions twice, as in the next one is, or is it allowing 1 2-year extension?
I think the way it's written,
I would just take the word annual out.
yeah, I think what it's trying to say is you can extend it by 1 or 2 years.
Okay, was it something to,
I think. I mean, annual increments, that would be.
Means a
you
year.
can say 1
Yeah,
year,
yeah.
2 years, but then it's capping it at 2 years.
yeah, so I wasn't sure exactly what you're trying to say there.
What would you?
2 years is fine. The memo sounds like your intent is for extensions to increments of up to 2 years.
Okay.
So that language to me sounds fine.
And are you thinking up to 2 1-year extensions or a single 2-year extension? Either would be okay?
That gets to the next one, which
Okay.
where now the next one, the memo says shifts the plat approval. This is the final plat, and may be granted for up to 1 year twice for a total of 2 years. Which clearly the memo says you could do 1 year and you could do it twice.
Right.
So
and
that's clear.
That's how I
That's
personally
clear.
interpreted that one.
Right. So
Okay.
I would
Consistency.
probably do that.
Okay.
But if you look at the memo, this is on 51. G. And this one doesn't talk about 2 years. The underlined language does not say 2 years. It
Correct.
says may be extended for a period up to 1 additional year after the 180 days. So if it could be 1 year twice, this number G needs to say that. And I like the way it was written in the memo. So the way it's written in the memo, both of those points I think are
Right.
more clear than the way that the proposed ordinance actually reads.
I think we had some additional staff comments after this most recent revision, where we've had instances come up where a developer has needed up to 2 years.
That's great. I'm fine with that. But
Okay.
just make sure that the language is
Okay.
clear and consistent.
So I will
Yeah.
say something along the lines of, and we'll wordsmith it.
Yeah,
Up
exactly.
to 2 years extension in 1-year increments.
Something like that. Yeah.
I think I can do better than that.
I'm sure you can.
If you said final approval of a preliminary plat, okay, sorry, extend the period for final approval for 1 year up to 2 times.
Yeah,
Does that make
sounds good.
sense? Good.
And I think your intention is to have both of those, the final and the preliminary, be that way.
That sounds great.
Well, that's pretty far in the weeds.
It's
That's what I got.
probably, again, one of the most significant changes in here.
It's huge,
is,
yeah, it's huge.
especially from a developer's standpoint, to not be
To be
rushed.
clear on what the extensions are, I think,
Right.
I agree with you. Mr. Allred, did you find your other point?
Yeah, so this is in 21-120. I'm looking at page 20 in the marked up version. So item I, in cases where a private easement, covenant, agreement, or restriction imposes obligations more restrictive yet consistent with this chapter, I'm just curious, could there be the situation where those obligations are more prescriptive, not just restrictive, and that they're asking for more things, but that would be also consistent with the chapter and be acceptable?
Intended to abrogate. Okay, so this is not an attempt to break or intrude on any private restriction, provided that where the provisions of these regulations are more. Okay, so essentially they're saying this subdivision covenant says that you can grow illegal substances on your property, or you can have a road whose minimum width is 65 feet. That's fine that your personal subdivision covenant or deed restriction says that, but sorry, the subdivision code says that your minimum road for an arterial has to be 100 feet. Doesn't matter what your personal subdivision covenant said, the subdivision code says it has to be a minimum of 120 feet. Does that answer your question?
And vice versa, right?
And vice versa. So
Yeah.
if your subdivision code said the maximum width is 60 feet and ours says your maximum width is 50 feet, sorry, your maximum width is 50 feet.
Well, I think this is specifically addressing areas where it's consistent with what the subdivision ordinance is asking for, but it is specifically calling out something that's more restrictive. So it's saying it's okay to be more restrictive, whatever it is that we're talking about, as long as it's still consistent with the chapter. I'm just wondering if there would be instances where a covenant or whatever other type of article they're referring to, it could be more prescriptive, but also
Yes.
still be consistent.
I
with
think
the
that's what
subdivision
this is saying, is if this said your minimum width is 50 feet and your private subdivision covenant says your minimum width is 60 feet, then the 60 foot would hold, because the concept of a minimum width is still similar between the two regulations, but the private one is more restrictive, saying it needs to be of a higher standard. And so, yes, we would honor that private restriction.
Right. So
Am I still
I mean, that
messed
works
up?
for width, but I'm thinking
Okay.
of something else, maybe, I don't know, something related to like low impact design or something. I mean, so there's a
If-
whole range of where.
Right. I don't think this necessarily gets into floodplain regulations, but if this said you need a minimum 1 foot freeboard between the base flood elevation and your finished floor, and you have a subdivision covenant from a private development that says to protect property, your freeboard has to be 3 feet, then that one would hold. Again, it's because it's a higher standard.
Yeah, so would higher standard be better, I guess, instead of
Well,
just focusing on something that is more restrictive? Because I'm just curious if it would
Right.
always be the case that what is being described is more restrictive versus a higher standard.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
So better language than more restrictive, which, first of all, sounds kind of punitive.
Mhm.
Right.
And sometimes bigger is better, sometimes littler is
Yeah,
better.
exactly, yeah. You're
And,
getting what I'm going at.
right,
Yeah,
more
okay.
more progressive
Yeah.
might be a better term, but that's pretty squishy, so we'll
Yeah.
figure out.
Yeah, I think restrictive works in some instances, but I can imagine some where something like a higher standard might be more appropriate. So
Right.
sort of a catch-all would be better maybe in that case.
And again, that would be up to the Administrative Review Committee to interpret what that would be in any given case.
Right.
Okay.
Any further questions? No? Okay, that's good for today.
That is fabulous.
Ricci,
I
thank you very
appreciate
much.
it. If you think of any, feel free to email them to us, and I will work on the, making sure that all of the new sections line up with the old sections in the numbering scheme for conversion. And in case, say, a section was completely deleted, not only will it say deleted in the left column, but it'll also say, no longer applicable or whatever in the new section to show you that it's no longer there. And we'll work on the whole marking up
Well, it's
issue.
it's fine. It's just a big document with a lot of moving parts.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much for your time.
All right. Does anybody care to address the Plan Commission on this case tonight? Don't all jump up. All right. In that case, public input section of this hearing is closed, and we can go into discussion. If there's anything to discuss, now we're going to have, I guess, the rest of the articles still to come, at least one more meeting. The rest of the manual of practice. I did have a question about the manual of practice, I guess, now that I think of it, so I'll go ahead and ask it now. So if you take a lot of stuff out of the ordinance and put it in the manual of practice, and then you want to change the manual of practice, is this done administratively, or does there have to be further Plan Commission or council approval of that?
Nope, it's done administratively. And there is I can direct you to where that is in,
I thought that's what the memo said. I just want to
Right.
make sure that.
yes, and it's done through collaboration between the city engineer and the Community Development Services Director. And there is an administrative process where they discuss it, and the revision itself is logged, and one of the sheets at the end of the entire manual of practice, which you don't have a copy of because it's after Chapter 26, is
Yeah.
simply a log sheet of what revisions were made, similar to the logging sheet on the front of the zoning ordinance, where every time there's been a text amendment, it gives, the date and the subject matter and the ordinance number.
Yeah. So, I don't know how I feel about taking things that needed to be approved before and require them not to be approved by either us or the city council. However, I mean, it's a technical manual, so I don't know if it's a problem or not. I mean, maybe somebody's more familiar with this kind of stuff.
I would say I'm probably more familiar with the manual practice in Champaign. We use that a lot. And quite frankly, most of the information contained in that manual, we wouldn't understand.
I agree with you.
So-
I could tell that from reading this one.
I mean, a lot of it
Right.
is, at least in,
It's a technical
It's
manual,
a technical
isn't it?
manual
Yeah.
with details of street construction.
Sure, right,
And
yeah.
sewer grates,
No, I approve
So-
of the idea of having a technical manual. I do. I think it's smart.
I'm not, while I understand your point of maybe there should be some kind of
Annual
oversight
review
review
or
of
something,
what goes
yeah.
in it, I'm not, to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure that a body outside the engineering division have the expertise to review it and amend it.
I don't.
I would offer, I think, to suggest to the planning division that if and when changes are made, we log them, and every year we come and make a presentation to Plan Committee to let you know if and what changes were made. Because I think, frankly, that is probably the most significant change.
Yeah.
Is taking something that used to be the purview.
Right.
Of. and
City
I-
council, at the very
right.
least, yeah.
And I don't think I've seen a zoning, well, again, I would have to research to see if there have been, what changes there have been made to the subdivision code. I think there have been 8 done, and they were of more substantial things. They
I-
weren't technical standards, they
Yeah,
were,
I've been doing this 11 years, I guess, and I can't recall any, so that means there must not have been very many, and if there were, I forgot.
would you be interested in like a little annual report of,
I think
If
when,
and
you know, at the end of the year, when we get the new zoning map and the, all the changes that we made, I think maybe a section of that says changes made to the manual of practice. And I don't think that's really an action item as much as it is an information item.
right, correct,
Right,
a little staff report,
exactly.
okay.
I mean, I think it'd be worth it. I'm not going to know what any of them are, but Mr. Fell will.
And I appreciate you addressing that, because I think that will be one of the big concerns of city council is, that.
And I think what we could do, if we're reporting on that, is state things in plain language. You probably don't need to know if something goes from, 0.9 to 0.88.
Sure.
But we can say we slightly reduced the diameter of whatever copper
Sure.
conduit.
Yeah.
There we go.
That's the only other thing I have. Anybody else? In that case, we're going to, I guess, continue this. Do we have a date at which we will take it back up again? Mr. Fell has something before we do
Just a small
that.
question. When we bring this up again, I'm assuming that we can back up to these sections we're working on. Okay.
Yeah, I think at some point we'll consider it all, right, at the very end. And maybe get it, as amended version by then. Okay, anything else?
Yeah. Should be the November 14th. I believe that's our next plan.
I think
our next
November
one?
7th.
November 7th?
Yeah,
Okay. November 7th.
okay. Okay, so I'm going to do a voice vote, just because. So all those in favor of continuing this case to November 7th Plan Commission meetings, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The hearing is continued. We don't have any old business, no new public hearings, no new business, no audience participation. Staff report?
Yes, so you heard at the October 10th meeting, there were 2 cases that went on to city council, or I guess there's 2, multiple cases. So there were 2 Champaign County Zoning Board cases. Those went to council. They chose to protest neither of those cases. So that was the rezoning from ag to, from conservation recreation back to ag for the western part, and then for the rural residential overlay district. And then the cannabis text amendment that passed council with some minor changes, so I'll run through those real quick. First, where in the table of uses, where conditional use permits had been recommended, they changed those to special use permits, so those would go through Plan Commission and then through City Council. Second thing is in the definition for dispensaries, for the separation, the distances between dispensaries and also between dispensaries and K through 12 schools, we just added the phrase non-medical to specify that we were talking about non-medical dispensaries, because otherwise, as written, it was kind of ambiguous. So you might have a situation where, for instance, New Med, if somebody was reading it a certain way, they might say, well, New Med can't have their non-medical dispensary at their current location because there's already a dispensary right there. So we just wanted to clarify that we were saying a non-medical dispensary can't be within 1,000 feet of a non-medical dispensary. So that cleaned that up. The third item is that the state law changed in August for medical cannabis, and they actually struck their distance requirements for medical dispensaries. Previously, it had been it was 1,000 feet from schools, daycares, other things. The state completely struck that, so council decided to strike that from the zoning ordinance as well, and that really matched the spirit of what we were trying to do with the medical cannabis in the first place, was just to match exactly what the state was requiring. So the state got rid of that, so did we. And then fourth, to add a little bit more flexibility, we added a special use permit requirement for cultivation centers or craft growers that's within 300 feet of residential zones. So one thing that we noticed, so you'll recall, the recommendation from Plan Commission was just not to allow cultivation or craft growers within that 300-foot buffer. But one thing we noticed, we're looking at the maps in a little bit more detail. There are a lot of really, really large agricultural parcels that are right on the border of the city that may be suitable for cultivation centers, and you could put a cultivation center well away from any residential zone, but part of their property was within, would be within that 300 feet. So we just wanted to not disallow those parcels and say, if you're within the 300 feet, you can come in for a special use permit. So that would come through Plan Commission, that would go through City Council, and as part of a special use permit, you could have a site plan approved that shows your cultivation center is, far, far away from the residential zones, and it won't be bothering anybody. So that adds a little bit more flexibility, and those are the changes that were passed.
Great, thank you.
Could I
Mr. Ricci?
correct something? So the next memorandum and other articles will be at the November 21st.
No,
meeting.
November,
Right,
okay.
November 21st.
So in fact, for the record, the plan case 2383 T19 will be continued until the November 21st Plan Commission meeting.
Correct. That will allow me to still get it to you fairly quickly, but then to give you several weeks to have it to read at your leisure rather than just 1 week.
Does anybody object to that? Nope, great. Thank you. Okay, is that study session's over? In that case, we're adjourned.